Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of In the Dark. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, obviously picking up with the conversation from last episode, okay, so maybe Jess is being chased because of who Jennifer Walters is. Like, obviously, all they were able to find out is she disappeared like 10 years ago, and Murphy's like, all right, let's go out and find some information. And literally when that happens, the power goes out. Which, interestingly enough, this episode very much reminds me of an episode of The Republic of Sarah. It was specifically episode 8. Not a one-for-one, but like a whole snowstorm situation. Kind of gets people stuck and in respective places. And a whole bunch of stuff, dramatic stuff goes down. Very similar in this case. So it's like, cool. So now this leads into a thing of like, right, they're all stuck together. And this is like kind of the worst and most complicated group of people to get stuck together. Being stuck together. So obviously Max and Murphy have like their shouting match because Leslie gets on Murphy, who's like, no, let's get out of here, try to find like a library or something, which Leslie's like, there's not going to be anywhere nearby that has power. And she's like, well, we'll go further. And she's just kind of like, look at you being like controlling and everything. And so it goes back into like a back and forth between her and Max when it comes to the whole. Initially she's kind of like, oh, let's get out of here. And then both Trey and Felix are like, yeah, we shouldn't, like, maybe we should wait. And she's like, what? And then it's like, Max is like, see, like, no one, and she's like, well, no one's complaining now. It's like, yeah, because no one wants to argue with you because they know there's no point. Then it turns into the typical X thing of like, they start throwing shade at each other. Well, I'm glad we're not together. Well, I'm glad we're not together. Like, oh, you were the worst thing that ever happened to you, the worst thing that ever happened to me. Blah, 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 back and forth because they are so both totally still into each other. There's feelings there, but they're both too stubborn. I mean, to be fair, they're also like really bad for each other, but I think that's what makes the relationship so intoxicating. Because we all have a tendency to kind of go into relationships that are probably not the best for us, but it's just the way it makes us feel. So it's just like the rush you get from relationships. So there's all of that. So Felix said, oh, I'll go with her. Hi, bye. You know, saying bye to Leslie. And Felix is like, I love Trey being like, yeah, I should probably go too because it'd be awkward. And she's like, yeah, thanks. This has been a blast. He's like, I know you're being sarcastic, but still, thanks for the hospitality. And so when they're leaving, and the moment Max and Leslie start doing the thing, I'm like, they're going to walk back in it. Because it's like, yeah, the storm is too bad. And it's like, if you had just listened in the first place, but it's like, Murphy already made a whole point, stormed out. And then they come back in, and like, Leslie's like, got her top off. It's just like, ah! And it's like, they're about to, it's like, right, they have no choice. It's like, all right, since their powers is all, how about everybody just go to bed? And I love the whole thing of like, Felix trying to make, it's like, right, if it makes you feel any better, my sister's pansexual. And Murphy's almost like, what the hell does that have to do with it? And it's like, oh, that means she is not really fully into anyone, so that means she's not really fully into Max. Which I love Trey being like, no, that's not the case. What are you talking about? Pansexual means that you're really into someone, gender doesn't matter to you. And he's like, okay, Mr. Woke. I'm like, I don't think that's being Mr. Woke. I think that's just like properly defining being pansexual, that, you know, like, gender legitimately doesn't matter. Like, you kind of don't see gender, you're just into people to be into people. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point and stuff like that. It's a whole thing of like, okay, so who's going to sleep in the one sped bedroom? There's also the chair, and it's like, oh, Felix, can me and Trey talk? Which, you know, Murphy's like, hey, I can't be in a relationship right now with everything that's going on. And it's like, Trey's kind of understanding. And I even love later on when Jess is like, oh, wow. Well, first, it's like, why didn't Felix ever tell... Wait, his sister's kind of gay? Why didn't he ever tell me that? Probably because he didn't want you sleeping with his sister, which is ironic, because it's like, right, you didn't want Jess to sleep with your sister, but you ended up sleeping with Murphy. So it's like, it's kind of a weird thing in its own right, but yeah, it's like, oh, to be fair, he's also not super close with his sister, so I guess that's one big reason why it was never like oh, you're looking for someone, you're in between relationships, Jess? Hey, you should meet my sister. It's like, no, that's weird. It's like, I think the last thing he wants is like knowing that his friend is banging his sister. It's like, well, I guess him and, I don't know if he would, I don't know what he'd describe him and Max as. I think he'd be like, we're friends, and I'm sure that's not the easiest thing for you to know. Like, oh yeah, my friend's banging my sister, especially later on. I'm sure you don't even want to refer to it as banging your sister. Ugh. But it is that thing of like, Right, you're literally in the house. Like, that's also a thing. Like, how can you do that? How can you have sex knowing your brothers? Not just your, like, other people, okay, you can make some, like, because of Trey and, like, Murphy. It's more of a middle finger to Murphy. You could say, like, oh, it had nothing to do with that. It's an extra middle. It just makes it even harder. Like, oh, we're going to piss off Murphy and blah, 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 blah. But it's like Murphy and Trey there, so that's one thing. But it's like, come on, like, Felix is there. It's like, don't you going to feel weird, Max? It's like, oh, I'm having sex with Felix's sister while he's in the house, or hey, I'm having sex with Max while my brother's at that. Like, I don't know, but I guess it's that thing of like, right, we're in the throes of passion, so we're not going to think about that stuff. I also really quickly like the conversation of like Felix early on, be like, all right, so hand me the gun. It's like, we don't have it. He's like, oh, nice joke, guy. He's like, no, we really don't have it. It's like, what? It's like, right, we're not thinking about I think he brought it up of like, yeah, we left it back there, so it's going to be an issue. Once again, I think that dude's not dead, so he's probably carrying around Leslie's gun. Once again, it's going to be an issue. And it's like, I don't know, buy a replacement. He's like, oh, a replacement for a custom gun that our psycho mother got her for her Sweet 16? I'm like, that's so weird. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've never been in a situation. I don't know if that's a not that unusual gift. I get it. It's like, right, you want your child to be protected. So it's like, that might just be like his weird family, but there might be other families like, no, that's not too strange. Maybe not necessarily for your Sweet 16, that being a present, but maybe like, oh, like you gift it to them at some point because like, right, you want them to be safe, but not a Sweet 16 present. But like I said, who knows? Maybe there are people who had that for like a Sweet 16 present. So that was interesting. But circling back, I do like that Jess inside of Murphy's head, which is also interesting that Murphy still hasn't really processed it. It's like, right, that's not actually Jess. It's your subconscious manifesting itself as Jess because it's saying all the stuff that you know that Jess would say under these circumstances. So the fact of the matter is, she's like, I'm super proud of you with not having to sleep with Trey, which first I was like, she did sleep with Trey. What are you talking about? Oh, under these circumstances, right? She could have slept with him. And it's like, yeah, because normally that's your way of dealing with, like, when you're in awkward and complicated situations like this, usually you sleep with someone just to kind of, like, that's how you, like, deal with your feelings. Rather than, like, properly deal with them, you're like, I'll bang them away. So, there was that. There's the Max and Leslie situation where it's like, oh, like, at one point, like, Murphy's looking for her phone because she's lost it, and she's in a panic because she's, like, worried, like, what if Jess tries to call me, and it's, like, there's no signal, but it's, like, yeah, like, I think, I'm stupid. I think phones can work like that where you can still get a message, even though the person doesn't have a signal, you can still, like, leave. I don't know if it would be a thing of like, right, this person's out of reach. I don't know if you'd still be able to leave a voicemail in that time frame or not. I mean, to be fair, the last person who called you wasn't even Jess. It was a real Jennifer Walters, but well, you called her, or maybe she called. Yeah, she called you, I think. Well, not unless that really was Jess that had called, or whatever the case may be. It might have actually been the legitimate Jess because she heard her breathing. It was like, I know her breathing. So, because at first I was like, is that like the real Jennifer Walters? It was like, no, it was probably Jess in a situation where she couldn't really talk, maybe. Whatever the case may be. So, she wants, like, at the very least, have her phone just in case when the power does come back, when there is a signal, she'll be able to get whatever messages that Jess left her. And she gets everyone to help her, and even Max is like, right, we'll find it, which for her is like, right, you're willing to help. It's like, oh, like, he's like, I'm just trying to help so we can all go to sleep. It's like, no, like, her touching Trey's hand bothered you, and it's like, right, which is interesting, because you're not the only one bothered by all that, because so is Felix. So Max has to be like, yes, I am. It's still, like, there's some feelings about Murphy. It's like, it's complicated, it's bad, but yeah, I still have feelings for her. Turns out, Leslie brings up the fact is of her ex. It's like, yeah, it's been 2 years and I haven't got over, which I understand. Been in that situation myself where it took me a long time to get over an ex. So one particular ex, not saying that in like a negative light. It's just like, no, just legitimately for me, it took me a very long time to get over one of my particular exes. So like, I get that to some extent, especially because like, no matter, even when Max is trying to get over Murphy, it's like, yeah, you try to get over and immediately you find yourself like right back around. I mean, that's the whole point too of like, yeah, you say like arguing with me is no point, yet you still do it all the time anyway. So that was interesting. And hearing them bang it out, which before that happened, Felix kind of opened up a little bit. He was like, oh yeah, like him and his sister, he talks about the fact is that like it was sometime after his dad died that they would just enter arguments, and it just got to the point they couldn't talk anymore. Like, I think it's just that maybe they were like lashing out just because of dealing with their dad's death, but whatever the case may be, it's just like, maybe it's just his sister's personality just doesn't mesh with him, and that's why they always, like, were they like this when they were kids, or is it just being older, or was it just their dad's death that's like, maybe their dad kind of acted as a mediator in certain regards, and their mom just kind of was like, I'm out of it, do whatever. Because I think for Felix, he kind of goes into it a little bit later on, but his sister's the golden child. She's the favorite child, so he always felt probably amongst his family, he probably always felt like the most like an outsider because he wasn't anything like anyone else in his family. So we'll kind of dive into that in a little bit, but I think that was kind of interesting. So because after hearing because Felix had talked about like, right, having a sibling and everything, and like what kind of like how complicated that is, because Murphy was like, yeah, you being stuck with someone forever that you're not even like that you like, and it's like, yeah, that is the interesting and complicated thing of family, which is so interesting because Jess is her best friend, but I feel like she's like the closest thing you have to kind of a sister. But it's like not being tied by blood is a very like it adds in like being blood related to someone adds that very complicated element to it, whereas like her and Jess aren't blood related, so maybe that makes the argument of them being kind of like sisters makes it a little easier than actually being sisters, you know. But I think it was interesting that I love like when Murphy's trying to be sexy and stuff, she's like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm gonna lay on the bed. Hey Trey, no, you can lay right next to him. He's like, no, I'm gonna check a different room because he knows what's up, and that's like frustrating Murphy. It's like, I'm feeling these feelings, I need to bang them out. And so she's in there with Jess, and she's kind of like, oh man, that must suck. That's like, yeah, I thought you were making progress, but obviously you need to bang it out. That's what this whole looking for a phone thing is like. Oh, you need to focus on the whole, oh, I'm missing, so you need to kind of deal with something with those feelings. It's like, oh, Felix is here giving you a pizza. It's like, what about Felix? It's like, what about him? It's like, have sex with Felix. She's like, what? No, that's weird. I'm like, is it really that weird considering your first time you've already had sex with Felix and it was a threesome? Like, what are we even talking about here? I mean, it's kind of weird because it's like, right, is it any less? But I guess it is actually less. It is more awkward because it's a one-on-one, making it more intimate. And so, like, at the very least, you had Hannah there to be a buffer, so it wasn't that crazy. But then it's just, I love, the moment he comes back in the room, Jess is like, take off your clothes. Take off your clothes. I'm like, I love that. But then Murphy's like, no, come sit beside me. Oh, no. Getting all flirty and just like, it's so weird when you get to see like when Murphy is when she's in her sexy time mode. And so like they start doing their thing, and he has an early release, and it's like, oh, and it's like, you kind of feel bad for him because like, oh, he got caught in the throes of passion, because it's also like, one, it's like Murphy's very attractive and he has a thing for her on top of that. I was about to say, but I'm like, really? I mean, he's like, this doesn't happen all the time. You can literally, no, call my exes right now and they tell you this never happened. This has never happened before. But I'm also like, she was in a threesome with you, and we didn't hear any issues then. It almost feels bad. It almost makes you feel weird because it's like, oh, are we forgetting the fact that like we're kind of letting that threesome situation slide? Like even when it's later on revealed, like, oh yeah, me and Felix slept together. So one time it's like, are we not going to acknowledge the threesome? Like that it wasn't just like regular casual sex. It was kind of something special. It was a threesome. Like shouldn't that matters, ladies and gentlemen? It's an important detail. But that's why I was like, oh, like I said, it's just a more intimate thing, just him being by himself. So he's just kind of like, yeah, thanks. Which I think in the grand scheme of things is actually interesting. Not the way he wanted it to go, but literally everyone gets off in this episode, which is interesting. I'm sure Felix would rather it had been like through actual sex, but it's like, no, everyone got off to some extent, so. And so Murphy's just like, you know what, I'm going to take a shower. And lo and behold, who goes in there with her tray? So it's like, yeah, I decided to come here because I heard you taking a shower. So they do their thing. Felix comes over and he's just kind of like, pouring himself out. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry about before, but you know that time we had sex. And he's just kind of, before he really pours his heart out, because he's probably going to be like, honestly, Murphy, I kind of have a thing for you. Then he sees Trey's clothes. He's like, oh, that's weird. That's awkward. And it's like, yeah, we should probably go check on him. And they're looking for Felix, break a vase, Max and Leslie get up. And I love her cycle. And it's like, oh, you you expect everyone to kind of do whatever you want to, everything to go your way. And she's like, well, I can psychoanalyze you too, and you're a bitch. And I love that. It's just like, Murphy's just so mean. I love it. Because I love that it's just like, went for the simple low blow. It's like, could go like, no, why go for high-hanging fruit when I could go for the easy blow? But Felix ended up finding out about, like, right, you have my inheritance. I was like, what's that about? Oh, we're talking about money? It's like, no. A whole bunch of, their dad was a collector of, like, newspapers. Something like, he collected every newspaper. It's like, oh, is that really all this is about? But for him, it's like, it was important because it's like, which, you know, Leslie was kind of like, oh, it's not that big. Like, fine, you can have them. He's like, no, I don't want you to give them to me. I wanted Dad to give them to me because he ends up, it was actually a really heartbreaking moment where you just kind of feel really bad for Felix because he was like, you and Dad had everything. This was our thing. And for him, he talks about it later on with Murphy. It's like, if he gave this to you, that means it didn't mean anything. Like, it didn't mean as much to him as it meant to me. Like, he couldn't even, this one thing, that was kind of our thing, he couldn't even leave them to me. He left them to you. And it's like, for him, it's more proof of just like, right, no one ever chooses me. And then Murphy kind of looks up and kind of perks up, being like, oh, kind of feeling bad for Felix. Or like, yeah, like, that kind of applies in her case. It was like, no one ever chooses me. That's why he always feels like a second-class citizen in his family, because it's like, she will always be the golden child. And she's like, right, I'm glad. It's been a while since one of your little breakdowns, Felix. Which I'm like, I think he has every right to be upset in that moment, because it's like, this is the one thing him and your dad bonded over, and to find out, like, he gave it. It's just a symptom of, like, a bigger issue, just Felix not being insecure, feeling like no one ever chooses him, you know? Which was sad. But then we find out, hey, so, oh, I found your phone. Like, Trey starts laughing. I'm like, what the hell is he laughing about? I have your phone. I'm like, Jesus Christ. All of this shenanigans, all of this shit. And it's just like, I mean, to be fair, it was all just a means to kind of distract Murphy, because she needed a goal to keep herself distracted, not worried about. That's what, I mean, this all served a purpose anyway, because, like, going through all of this ended up leading to, you know, time passing. So by the time, like, they wake up later on, it's like, oh yeah, like, everything's fine. Like, the ice has started to melt, and the signals and the lights and the powers are back on. So it all worked out. This might be the first episode I was trying to think. I want to say the episode with Michael. No, because I was about to say, this might be the first episode in a long time that's taking place in one particular spot. But also, it's like it's one of, like, more recent episodes. Because I want to say that Michael episode was episode 3, I want to say. That entire episode just stayed focused on what Murphy was up to. We never cut away to until, like, I think the very end is when we cut away to Jess, and they kind of do the same thing in it. I'm sure there's other episodes that have done that, like, in the previous seasons, but it's just kind of, yeah, it's like, it's not even just like we cut away to, like, oh, we're in different locations, like with the episode with Murphy and the whole Michael thing, you know, in episode 3, but it's like, this episode is purely inside of Leslie's house, except for the ending, you know? So I thought that was interesting. But, yeah, all of this fuss was about, you know, Murphy just trying to distract herself. So she ends up, you know, going to check on Felix. And he's kind of like, yeah, I just don't want to talk about it. But he talked about, like, the newspaper things. Like, yeah, my dad had them stacked so high in his office that you couldn't even move around. But he let me read them if I kept quiet. And he's like, that's why I, like, kind of, like, know as much as I do, because I was just reading a whole bunch of newspapers. Some of that stuff is probably not something like a 2-year-old or something should be reading, because some of that's very, like, dark stuff, but still. And that's why it means so much to him, you know? And I love that, like, that their back and forth is just basically them shitting on Leslie, because it's like, yeah, your sister, don't worry, like, you know, your sister isn't that perfect. She seems like a terrible person to me. It's like, you're just saying that because she's sleeping with Max. It's like, nah, she's, like, arrogant and snobbish. She's like all the bad parts of you without all the good stuff to balance it out. Which is like, oh, that is a sweet Murphy compliment. So, like, they just go back and forth. Murphy ended up going to sleep, but Felix was looking through his dad's newspaper because he knew exactly when all this stuff related to Jennifer Walters, like, went down. So he ends up finding out in the newspaper, like, that her uncle was believed to be connected to the kidnapping or whatever, but it's only because he was the only one. So I'm like, so that's where we're kind of getting, like, our foot point. I don't know what the hell I'm trying to say. Our starting point. Jesus. of kind of where to kind of start looking into this whole Jennifer Walters thing. And Trey's calling his phone. I'm like, where is your phone? He says it's in the car. I'm like, is it? Oh, cool. Of course. I was like, yeah, the moment it starts ringing, I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's going to be at the crime scene. It's like, oh, yep, there's Josiah's wife. Cool. I mean, it also speaks volumes that no one's come across that crime scene yet. Makes sense, probably considering everything got slowed down, but it's like, you wouldn't immediately jump to that, like, well, Josiah disappeared with his kids, so, like, who's going to really come looking? Like, unless it's, like, some concerned neighbors who haven't heard from them in a while, like, I don't know, like, how long it's going to be before that crime scene is discovered. I mean, like, the only thing I can think of is, like, let's say that hitman from the cartel getting away, like, still being alive at the end. That's about it. So, that's going to be complicated and interesting to see how that plays out. But, and I wonder how long it's going to be before they realize, my phone might be at the crime scene, along with Leslie's gun. Yay! So what's the next episode going to look like now that all the power's back on and after the aftermath of everything? Like I said, at the very least, everyone got off. It's not exactly what everybody wanted because, but, everyone still got their rocks off to a certain extent, to some extent, like I said. So, just a weird, complicated, drama-filled, complicated relationship-filled episode of just like, the worst possible combination of people to be stuck in a house together, considering everything that's going on, all the drama and relationship stuff caught between everybody in this. So, nevertheless, I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.